Hi everyone, I'm Kennan, and today we're talking about my favorite type of car, exotic cars. More specifically, 5 exotic cars that I feel are undervalued today and I suspect will be worth a lot more in the future. And with that, let's get started. Before I get going though, as you might expect, this Ferrari 550 Maranello is going to be for sale shortly on Cars and Bids. Doug recently did a review of this specific car and it will be live on the website soon. But if you've been in the market for a Ferrari, after you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below where you can head to carsandbids.com where you can check out our wide selection of Ferraris. Before I get going, I want to clarify that I understand that some cars on this list are already very expensive. However, some cars on this list are more attainable than you might think. But regardless, all of them, I suspect, will be worth a lot more than they are currently. I would love to watch this video in 5 or 10 years to see if I was right. Regardless, I just wanted to make that disclaimer that I know some of these cars are already pretty expensive or have appreciated a lot already. But it's time to start with my very first car, and that would be the Generation 1 Dodge Viper. Now, of course, this is an American car, and a lot of people think that exotic cars have to be from other places, but I would argue this is a high-performance car with a very unique design that was produced in low numbers, and that to me makes it exotic, and by a lot of people's definitions, that's what an exotic car is. Regardless, the first generation Dodge Viper is a crazy one. These cars offer access to something that we really don't have today, and that is a truly raw driving experience. They have famously no driver's aids, no traction control, no ABS, no airbags. They are really stripped out, really simple cars, and they are as analog as it comes. Between 1991 and 1996, Dodge would produce roughly 6,400 examples of the first generation Viper. And in that time, I suspect quite a few were lost due to driver errors, as that car was known to be difficult to drive, and I'm sure a significant number of them have been wrecked since then. Famously, the Dodge Viper is powered by an 8-liter naturally aspirated V10 that produced 400 horsepower and 465 foot-pounds of torque. It also exclusively had a 6-speed manual transmission, as all Vipers would, and like I said, truly no driver aids whatsoever. The first generation cars are also debatably the most iconic. The shape of the Dodge Viper is a wild one, and that shape captivated a generation when it came out as being something truly insane, as Chrysler at the time was really making kind of mundane, relatively normal cars. And here came this insane looking supercar that was able to take on European rivals at the time. Given its difficult nature to drive and less than great build quality, values on the Dodge Viper aren't that crazy. Interest has certainly increased over the last couple of years, but these days you can get a first generation Viper for between $30,000 and $50,000 all day long. However, I suspect that values will increase one day, or at least continue to slowly trickle up. And the reason that is because, well, as cars become more sanitized and a lot more powerful and honestly less usable as a result, I suspect that cars like the Viper will attract a different audience of people who want to experience a raw, visceral driving experience, but don't necessarily want to get caught breaking the speed limit by the time they go into second gear. So I suspect that the Dodge Viper will become one of those cars that is appreciated more in the future, and it has room to increase in value going forward. Keeping with the theme of first generation cars with 10-cylinder power, we come to the next car on my list, which is the Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera. Introduced in 2007, these cars were designed to be the ultra lightweight, stripped out, focused version of the already successful Gallardo, and they would pay homage to the 350 GT by using the word Superleggera, or lightweight, in their name. And they were indeed very light. These cars use carbon fiber in a lot more places than the standard Gallardo. The bodies were made out of carbon fiber, the mirrors, the extra wing that was added to the back, the underbody, all of it was made out of carbon fiber, and the result was that the Gallardo Superleggera weighed 220 pounds less than the standard road-going Gallardo. But Lamborghini wasn't focused on just stripping away weight. They also upgraded things like the wheels and the brakes and the suspension to make the car even more focused to drive. Additionally, they would also add a little bit more power than the standard car, increasing it by 10 horsepower thanks to a new induction system to 522 horsepower. Lamborghini would only produce 618 examples of the Gallardo Superleggera for the entire world, and although no official production statistics exist, roughly between 10 and 20 of them were produced with gated 6-speed manual transmissions, like the one that Jeremy Clarkson drove in the episode of Top Gear where they went to find the best driving road in Italy and Switzerland. Being ultra lightweight and special and rare, well, you'd expect these cars to be worth a lot more than they actually are. Using sales data from the last 5 years, I calculated the average sale price of a Gallardo Superleggera was $130,000, and they could be worth anywhere up to $180,000. Now, while that's still a lot of money, it's nowhere near as much as that car's nearest competitor, which is the 430 Scuderia. Similar in ethos, that car was an ultra lightweight, stripped out version of the company's mid-engine car of the time, the F430, and it was also exclusively equipped with an F1 gearbox. Although the Superleggera got some manuals, admittedly most of them also had a sequential manual gearbox. Regardless, those cars on average are worth about $220,000, and for really nice examples, they can be worth anywhere up to over $400,000, substantially more than the Gallardo Superleggera. Why this is, I'm not exactly sure. Admittedly, eGear was a more crude system than what Ferrari had developed for the F1 system for the 430 Scuderia, and that car got some more special tricks to make it a really special car to drive. But the Gallardo Superleggera is also an extremely special car, and I suspect that the market has kind of forgotten that they exist. I would not at all be surprised if they, especially the manual transmission cars, are worth a lot more in the future. The next car on my list is without question the most extreme, as it's already a multi-million-dollar car, but I think you'll see my point when I get more to it, and that is the Maserati MC12. Based on the Enzo Ferrari, the V12 mid-engine supercar produced by Ferrari in the early 2000s, this car was very different from the Enzo in that the Enzo was designed to be a road-going car. There would be a track-focused version called the FXX that would come along later, but that car was never built to compete with other manufacturers. The MC12 was built specifically to do exactly that, as it was a homologation special. 25 road examples would be produced for customers in 2004 to homologate the car for the FIA GT Championship. But then, in 2005, the rules would change and Maserati would have to change the dimensions of the car to make it compliant. And a second series of an additional 25 cars were produced for that year, meaning that there were 50 total road-going examples produced to homologate the car, and they had different dimensions from one another, which is totally wild. Additionally, compared to the Enzo, although they share a lot underneath, the MC12 was much longer and had much more extreme aerodynamics. The reasoning being that that car was designed to have a lower coefficient of drag compared to the Enzo. And although it couldn't have a higher top speed as being faster than a Ferrari, well, that's a cardinal sin in Italy, the car was designed for racing, and that's where it really excelled. And boy, did it excel. The MC12 was an incredibly successful race car. It won 6 team championships, 6 drivers championships, and 2 constructors championships, cementing it into the history of GT1 and GT championship cars. However, despite its rarity and racing pedigree compared to the Enzo, which is substantially more common, these cars don't sell for a whole lot more. Granted, there aren't many that have transacted recently, but one sold very recently in January for $3.8 million, an unbelievable amount of money. But when you consider that most Enzos transact for about $3.3 million and can go for over $4 million, that feels kind of low for what is a very special car. A more apt comparison might be the Mercedes-Benz CLK GTR, which was produced in homologation numbers in very low figures, and it was built specifically to go racing. Although only 28 of those were built compared to the 50 of the MC12, one of those recently sold for $10.2 million, substantially more than any MC12. And although that we're talking about huge astronomical numbers that I can't even fathom, to be totally honest with you, it seems like compared to the CLK GTR and definitely compared to the Enzo, the MC12 doesn't really get the love that it deserves, and it should, as it's an extremely impressive and insane car, and it has a lot of racing pedigree. And I suspect that collectors will appreciate these cars more as time goes on. Okay, now bringing it back a little bit more to earth, we come to the next car on my list, which is the Aston Martin Vanquish S, specifically the Vanquish S from the early 2000s, the Vanquish 1 as it's known in the community. Introduced in 2001, the Aston Martin Vanquish was Aston Martin's V12 flagship GT car, and they used it to show off their technical prowess, specifically with their aluminum work and carbon fiber work, as the car was entirely made of aluminum and carbon fiber. Famously, this car would also appear in the James Bond film Die Another Day as the V12 Vanish, which is a hilarious play on words. Regardless, it was the star of that movie, as one of the chase scenes against the Jaguar XK remains one of my favorites when they drive through the Ice Hotel. Even though the car was excellent enough for James Bond, Aston Martin wanted to improve on the Vanquish, and they decided to offer an S variant, a high-performance version of their flagship car, and they would do so in 2005 with the Vanquish S. Aston Martin would play with a lot of elements of the car to improve it over the Vanquish. They would give it stiffer suspension, a better steering system, and upgraded brakes, 6-piston calipers at the front, 4-piston calipers at the rear. They would also give the car substantially more power, bringing power up to 520 horsepower from the 465 found in the normal Vanquish. Over its production run, Aston Martin would only produce 1,086 examples of the Vanquish S, and it was the last Aston Martin to be hand-built at their Newport Pagnell factory, which is a famed part of Aston Martin history. However, given its beauty and its V12 engine and its relative rarity, these cars aren't crazy expensive. A Vanquish S on average today can be had for $98,000, which is still a lot of money, but not as much as you might expect for a car like this. You can get them as low as $75,000, and I suspect that has to do with the car's main Achilles heel, and that is its transmission. They all originally came from the factory with a sequential manual gearbox. Although it was cutting-edge technology at the time, it has not aged well. It doesn't drive particularly smoothly, and they are relatively unreliable. But then again, the entire car is relatively unreliable. In the words of Bamford Rose, the famed Aston Martin specialist, the cars are divas and require a lot of attention to keep running in top form. However, Aston Martin has a solution for its main Achilles heel, as they will offer a 6-speed manual transmission through the famed Aston Martin Works program. Naturally, this is very expensive, but it also requires sending a car to England, so not that many cars have had the conversion done. And I suspect those cars in particular will go up in value, as it fixes one of the main gripes people have with driving a Vanquish S. On the topic of the Vanquish S, I personally have to say that I adore those cars. I've driven several of them on a number of occasions, and I love almost every aspect of it, from the way it looks to the way that amazing engine sounds to the smell of the weird leather on the interior. They are really special cars, and given their rarity, I think that there's a chance that they will go up in value. However, I hope that that kind of doesn't happen anytime soon, as I would love to have one of those cars someday. And staying on the topic of front-engine V12 GT cars, of course it brings us to the proverbial elephant in the room, the Ferrari 550 Maranello. Introduced in 1996, this car represented Luca di Montezemolo's vision for a new Ferrari. This was going to be a usable car that his clients could drive, and it wouldn't be the normal mid-engine, temperamental, difficult-to-service car that Ferrari had been producing up until that point. He wanted to return back to Ferrari's roots, and he did so with this car. Harkening back to the Daytona, this car would use a very similar design ethos. Engine at the front, transaxle at the rear, and under this beautiful hood we have a 5.5-liter naturally aspirated V12 producing 478 horsepower and 419 foot-pounds of torque. And at the rear we have a 6-speed manual transmission that is changed with a gorgeous gated shifter. Now, I've already done a whole video going over the intricacies of the 550, which you can watch if you want to get really nerdy about it. However, the big thing I want to talk about would be this car's production figures. Only 3,083 examples of this car were produced, and that's incredibly rare. When you compare it to another icon that is a front-engine design, the 300 SL, 3,258 examples of that car were produced. So seeing a Ferrari 550 Maranello and a 300 SL these days, roughly the same level of unlikeliness. They're both relatively rare, despite that, well, it seems like more of these cars are around. Interest over the last several years has really increased on the 550. I remember a while ago you could get these cars for between $70,000 and $80,000 all day long and nobody really cared. But that is not the case anymore. These cars have become very expensive, with an average sale price for the last 5 years of $150,000, with a peak of $340,000. Then there's the convertible version of this car, the limited edition Barchetta. Those cars on average sell for $430,000, and they have peaked so far at $750,000. So it's without question that the market is recognizing how special the 550 is, and that really is its combination of rare ingredients. It's lovely design, it's naturally aspirated V12, its 6-speed manual transmission as its exclusive transmission, and, well, the relative rarity of these cars. However, I suspect that they will continue to rise in value as they are just really desirable, and critically, they're relatively reliable, certainly more reliable than their earlier predecessors, as Luca de Montezemolo had intended. But more important than almost all of that is how wonderfully these cars drive. And now it's time to go do exactly that. Okay, time to drive the 550. And to be honest with you, yet again, the whole reason I'm doing this video is just so I can drive this car, because it's just the greatest. Of all the cars on that list, you know, I love the Vanquish. I really love that car. I very much want a Viper. A Gallardo Superleggera is something I would not say no to as well. The MC12 is never, I don't think it's ever gonna happen for me. I would love that car, but it's trying to be somewhat realistic. I don't think that will ever happen. Regardless though, this car is just exceptional. Oh, the torque, everything about it. I just love these cars. I think this is the kind of car I like more so than the V8 ones. I really love the big V12 GT cars because they have a stateliness and a presence to them that is just awesome. And this car is just a joy to drive. From the clink clink of the gated manual transmission to the hilarious horn, you know, it's just, all of it is awesome. And the power of this V12, it's just great. And this car has been driven quite a bit, 50,288 miles currently, which is not unusual with 550s. These cars were designed to be used frequently and a lot, and yeah, you see them with miles occasionally, but that's kind of the one you want because this car is too good not to use. If you haven't watched it already, go to Harry's Garage, Harry Metcalf's YouTube channel, and watch his video he did about the 550, because he's driven them, I think he's about 50,000 miles of experience with them between press cars, his 550s, Barchetta also, and that's a great video on them. But this car is just, it's just sensational. A little burble from the exhaust there, and a natural one, not a BMW burble tune on a M340i, a legitimate burble tune. A legitimate burble out of this glorious engine. Just very little to dislike with this car. Yeah, I just wanted an excuse to drive it. There are some things about them that aren't great. So one of them is that the front overhang in these cars is really long. And it's easy to scrape this car on a curb or something like that. So you have to be really careful. And the hood's long already, so you're kind of calculating where it is, and it dips lower than you think. And, you know, undulations in the road can really change that. So it's something to always be aware of. That, and the steering is really over-assisted. It's certainly better than the 355 in that it's substantially more accurate, but it is light. I mean, you can basically steer it with like 2 fingers. It was the early days, they were figuring it out. But really, outside of that and the inherent ownership costs that come with a Ferrari, these cars are just really appealing. You could almost use it every day. Somebody asked me on the podcast if I would, you know, they had an E39 M5 and a Boxster Spider, and they wanted to know if they should sell both of those cars and just get one of these, or if some Lexus tried to race me. You go right ahead, dude. I'm in a Ferrari. They wanted to know if they should just get rid of that and just drive one of these every day. I don't think you'd want to do it. You certainly could, but you know that it is still a Ferrari at the end of the day, and the ownership costs are expensive. But man, to experience that V12 with that kind of regularity would be great. Wow, that was a bigger number than I was expecting. It's just, this car rules the way it gets. It's so satisfying. And like I said, it's no wonder these cars are so expensive now. They're just glorious to use. It's just such a sense of occasion. yeah. Oh, it's good. Oh, the brakes are lovely too. Oh, that's lovely. That's just satisfying. The Diablo I drove recently obviously is more fun. That's like more set your hair on fire. This is more refined and dignified. If you can afford one of these, I don't think it will disappoint you. I really don't think it'll disappoint you value-wise in the long run either. As Doug said, this is the Daytona of like our generation. It's so special, and I don't think people really realize how rare they are when you consider that seeing a 300 SL and this, it's almost the same level of likelihood, especially given the attrition rate of those over many more decades older that they are. They're just less of them around than were originally produced, but still, they're rare. They're very rare cars, and it should be celebrated every time you see one because it's so cool. I just keep playing with the shifter. It's just everything about this car is awesome. And those are 5 exotic cars that I suspect will be worth a lot more in the future. Admittedly, I can't afford most of these cars right now, but in the words of Ferris Bueller, if you have the means, I highly recommend picking one up. And that includes this 550 Maranello that will be live soon on carsandbids.com. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you very soon. Goodbye.